My name's Blair Palmer. I was this summer's business strategy fellow, and I'm going to take you on a different journey than Gagan just took us on, and talk a little bit more about how we can create a sustainable business strategy for the center moving forward through 2023. But a little bit about me first. I am an epidemiologist by training, and I currently work for UNICEF on the innovation team. So I've done a lot of work in the field, and I have about over 20 years of public and private sector background, so uniquely qualified to do this role because I bring both of those experiences to the space. And then, obviously, I wanted to be an astronaut when I was younger, so that's some foreshadowing. In addition, this is 2 years ago. It was taken in Jordan, so something told me I was going to be at OCHA with a bike while I was at UNICEF. So, a little bit of foreshadowing there. But why was I here this summer? So I was asked to employ my expertise of looking at public and private partnerships and how you could apply entrepreneurial solutions. I can still never say that word, and I live in San Francisco. But how could you apply entrepreneurial solutions to crisis worldwide? But specific to the center, how could we assess the objectives of the center and then examine how partnerships in the private sector and with foundations could mobilize resource not only for technological innovation, but stakeholder engagement and then corporate social responsibility. But before we really dive into it, let's talk a little bit, take a step back and talk about the mission of the center. Most of you all know, what the center does and what HDX is, but the true mission I found that we got to this summer is that the center would like to be the world's preeminent expert on humanitarian data. So started only, I will point out, 2 years ago. So that's a huge remit, but in the past, now almost 3 years, the center has become a trusted partner, not only for OCHA, but other UN agencies. So, and how to create speed to data in order to make better decision-making in the field, which then obviously results in improved outcomes. So if we were to look at it from an entrepreneurial lens, which I was asked to do, the questions I thought about were, first, how could we establish goals for the work streams of the center? So how do you ensure success, and how do they work better with private sector and foundation partners? Secondly, who are those partners? So how do you identify the ideal ones? And lastly, how do you explore creative ways to work with them? So knowing that we want to improve the speed of data availability, that we want to accelerate the speed of insight to data, and then also create stakeholder value, how do we answer those questions? How do we achieve it? So basically, this is what my summer involved. So I say Post-it notes, partners, and of course puppies. That's Zelda. I did 3 things while I was here from an exercise perspective. First, we took an entrepreneurial model and we ran each of the work streams and their teams through what they felt was their core focus, or what we called their heart zone, to really kind of figure out how that would enable the center's work overall. Secondly, I did a prospecting exercise to look at which foundation partners and private sector partners we would be ideally best to work with. And then lastly, I took all of that data, if you will, and put together a strategy framework around how we could create better partnerships for the center, which is what I'm going to focus on today. I'm just moving through. So what do you think about when you think of partnerships? So some of the examples here are of the best partnerships of our time. But I really think if you look at all of these examples that I put up here, I feel that what sets apart, these are the types of questions when you want to think about collaborations with anyone that you would want to ask yourself first. And what you really want to get to is that I'm sure Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak really wanted to figure out how they could set themselves apart. And so I think that's key in entering any partnership. And so how can you create a shared value between both organizations? So what does that look like operationally for what I did for the framework? So I put together a strategic framework that did a variety of things. First, we had to define the landscape of who and what was out there. Then really look to provide targeted messaging. So one of the things I think the center struggles with, and I hate using negative words, but is really not only what does the center do, but how do they distinguish themselves to work with the whole entire humanitarian sector. So beyond just UN OCHA, beyond the country offices, UN agencies, how do they really set themselves apart in what they do? Because it's very unique. So the awareness to, say, like a technology partner is probably at the moment pretty low. And I think that we really need to kind of boost that awareness and look how we can leverage resources of those tech partners. And then obviously we need to set goals for those partnerships. I did the prospecting exercise where I looked at a ton of companies and foundations to figure out who would be best suited and aligned with us. And then finally, I made some recommendations to that approach. So I think moving forward, and I'm seeing my time thing, what does that mean if you were to partner with a technology actor? These are the 5 things that we would want a technology actor to bring to the center. Well, I'd say most, if not all, right? So ideally, you'd want funding, you'd want assets of their technology, you want talent and human resource so that they could lend their brain power, you'd want their network so that you could capitalize on their influence, and then finally advisory, which is probably the most low-touch exercise on here, where they could actually work with you on, say, a case study or some other kind of alliance. So also, because we're driven by data here at the center, I dove a little bit deeper. And what I figured out by looking at this prospecting exercise is that there's a lot of resource out there. For example, last year, nearly $100 billion went towards corporate giving and foundation giving. That's crazy. And then out of the 75 companies that I looked at, 50 billion of that is up for grabs. So that's a lot. So I think we should probably take advantage of that. Also, one of the things I did differently was to look at the market cap value of the organizations. It's over $12 trillion. So there's money to be had, and I think that we need to figure out how to mobilize those resources the best way we can. So finally, what does that mean for an actual process? So first, I think overall, the strategy needs to be keep it as simple as possible. So the first thing would be to focus on the targets that we've identified. So go after 5 to 6 key partners, figure out who would be ideally best suited to work with us. Secondly, figure out how then you can access that brain capital to form sort of a more low-touch exercise, what I was talking about with case studies and alliances and things like that. That then opens up financial capital. Yay, that $100 billion I was talking about. So then once you have the money and the brains, how can you then make it count? How can you drive forward to make sure that those resources are used for impact? Clicking, clicking. So what's next? What does that mean for the center? Effectively, it's how you can basically do more with less, right? So if you were able to mobilize resources, you could maximize impact. So I would say the plan for the center is to get to that infinite and beyond space, where the center is sustainable and you're able to work with partners to keep things going. But we can't do it alone. So effectively, to do partnerships, you need lots of people involved. And so I ask of all you today, we'd like you to join us in concert for Humanitarian Data. Thanks.